Hi guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. My name's Amanda and I'm so glad that you're deciding to join me today. I wanted to share with you today my final wrap up for Middle Grade March. Middle Grade March was a readathon that was hosted by Krista from Books and Jams and Katie from Life Between Words, and it spanned the entire month of March, and their goal was to get more adults to read middle grade books. So throughout the month, I was able to read 28 middle grade books. Of those 28 books, 13 of them were physical books and 15 of them were audiobooks. So I listen to audiobooks rather frequently. I am a mom of 4 kids ranging in ages from 18 months to 9 years old. And so it's really hard for me to find time to actually sit down and physically read. So I listen to audiobooks a lot while I'm doing housework and taking the kids to and from things and things like that. So I had kind of a mesh of the two, but I was able to get 28 books done, which I'm really excited about. I have 15 books to talk about today. The rest of the books I've already talked about either on my Instagram stories. I have a highlight of Middle Grade March where I talk about some of them, and then a previous video that I did. And I will link the video and my Instagram account in the below in the description box. So if you're interested to see what other books I've read during Middle Grade March, you can find them there. But today I have 15 books to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. The first book is Night Divided by Jennifer A. Neilson. This book is about a girl, Goethe, who lives in East Germany during the Cold War. So it's after World War II. The Berlin Wall is just going up. Her father decides that they want to move from East Germany to West Germany. So he goes to try to scout out an apartment with one of her brothers. And while he's over there, the border's closed and the wall goes up. And so her and her oldest brother and her mom are all stuck in East Germany, and her father and her middle brother are stuck in West Germany. And so this is the story of her figuring out how to reunite her family and how to escape East Germany. It was really good. This is also a Maud Hart Lovelace nominee for this year. So here in Minnesota, there is a Maud Hart Lovelace award. I don't know if it's nationwide or if it's just a Minnesota thing. But I picked this up because of that, and it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. It was a kind of different, I read a lot of World War II historical fiction, and so this was kind of a different take on the aftermath of that and the effects that that war had on the subsequent years. But like I said, 4 stars, really good, recommend. The next book that I read was Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. So this is one of Krista's Goodreads book club picks, or was, for March. And so I decided to pick it up. I had never read it before, which I probably should have read it before now, but I haven't. And so I picked this up, and it was phenomenal. This book was so special. It follows a little girl, Sal, whose mom has left, and her dad relocate from, I think maybe Kentucky to Ohio. And then after they relocate, she decides to take a road trip with her grandparents out to Idaho, which is where she had last heard from her mom. And so she goes on a road trip with her grandparents, and on the road trip, her grandparents ask her to tell them a story. So she decides to tell them a story about her friend Phoebe. And so in telling Phoebe's story, she kind of comes to terms with her own story and what it means and her feelings, and the ending was heartbreaking, and it was just so good. Graham and Gramps in this are so sweet and so precious, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Fabulous book. Fantastic. All right. The next one that I read was a graphic novel. And this was Mighty Jack and the Goblin King. I read the first Mighty Jack last summer, so I decided to go ahead and pick this one up. It's a sequel. Mighty Jack is a graphic novel series by Ben Hatke. It is kind of a take on Jack and the Beanstalk, but it's a very different, fantastical take on it. So it's really good. It's a really fast read. Graphic novel, lots of fun illustrations. But I gave that 4 stars. That was a lot of fun. The next one that I read was Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Ryan. I read Echo 2 summers ago, and Echo is also by Pam Munoz Ryan. And Echo, to this day, is still one of my all-time favorite audiobooks that I've ever listened to. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. So I found Esperanza Rising in a thrift store a while back and decided to pick it up, and then just never got around to reading it. And so during middle grade March, I thought I'd give it a whirl. And I've come to realize that Pam Munoz Ryan's writing style speaks to me in a way that I really can't explain. There was something so lyrical and musical about this story, and it has nothing to do with music at all whatsoever. It was just moving. The book follows a girl, Esperanza, who lives on a plantation in Mexico with her parents. She is kind of high society. They have servants. She wants for naught. And then tragedy strikes, and her mother and her decide to relocate to California and end up becoming workers on the fields in California. And so she goes kind of from the top end of the totem pole back down to the bottom, and she is kind of learning how to use a broom and how to change a diaper and things that she has never had to do before, and she's learning how to do them. And this is the story about her and her discovery of what's important in life and what makes your life worth living, and just it was just good. It was just very touching, very moving. I don't know the right words to say to describe it, but I loved it. I ended up giving this 4 stars. It was really beautiful. After Esperanza Rising, I listened to an audiobook that I don't have a physical copy of the book, and it was Bridge to Terabithia. I had seen that Krista had read this, and I had never read it before, and so I decided I would go ahead and listen to it on audio, and I absolutely loved this book. At the end of the audiobook, there was an interview with the author, Catherine Patterson, and her son, David. And Catherine talks about how the book was based off of David's real life experiences. And that interview really pushed the rating over the top once I realized that it was based off of true events, and that Catherine wrote the book to kind of figure out her own emotions and how to handle her son through what he was going through. That to me made the book more relatable. After I read the book, I the next day watched the movie, and at the end of the movie, I was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And it was so touching. The book is about a little boy, Jess, and his best friend, Leslie, and they are neighbors. They create this fantastical, imaginary world in the woods by their house that only the two of them know about, and so it's a very personal thing between them. And then something happens, and it's just kind of about the way that they handle it and the healing process that they go through. And it was beautiful. I gave it 5 stars. I loved that book. All right, the next one is another 5-star read for me, and that is Sweep, The Story of a Girl and Her Monster. This was the group pick that Katie and Krista had picked out for us to read. And this book is just special. The tagline, or the like main quote that I took away from this book is that we save ourselves by saving others. And that, I think, encompasses the entire book. That this book is about a little girl, Nan, who's a chimney sweep in Victorian London, and it is about her and her journey to figure out who she is and where she belongs. And she has a golem who is there with her and is her friend. And so this goes through, or it talks about the history of the chimney sweeps and what the climbing boys and what they did. It also talks about the history of golems and what they are and what they mean and what their purpose is. You get a very brief view of the Jewish persecution in England, or not in England, but in Europe during that time. And it was just really, really special. This is one of those books that in the first paragraph, it grabs you and it carries you through the entire book. And it was beautiful and lovely. There are so many good quotes in this book that were just like, I think somebody else had said, and I agree, I wouldn't mind purchasing my own copy just so I can go through and highlight all of the really, really awesome quotes in this book. So this was another 5-star read for me. After that, I listened to another audiobook that I do not have a physical book for, and that is Unbound by Anne E. Burke. Unbound is the story of a little girl that lives on a slave plantation before the Civil War. It's somewhere in the South, and her family decides to escape the plantation, and it is their journey, or it's written in verse, and so it was a very fast listen. But it's the story of their journey and why they decided to try to escape and how they escaped and where they ended up. And it was really good. It was kind of a different take on that, with it being middle grade and from the point of view of the child that was a slave and tried to escape. I don't think I'd ever really read anything from that point of view before. And so that was really interesting. And the fact that it was written in verse, I gave it 3 stars. It was good. I enjoyed it. The next one that I read is another Pam Munoz-Ryan book. And I just saw this on the library shelf and it looked fun. And so, the colors of the cover are beautiful. And so I was like, okay, twist my arm. It's another Pam Munoz-Ryan, so we'll see. And sure enough, yet again, Pam Munoz-Ryan steps up to the plate. And she, once again, just like with Esperanza Rising, there was something to me that felt musical about this book, even though it had nothing to do with music. And I think that's really interesting that she can kind of connect with me as a reader on that level, where it's just, it's like a song, but it's not. And so The Dreamer is the story of Chilean poet Pablo Neruda's childhood. And I had no idea this was based off of an actual person's childhood when I started reading it. And so there is a little bit of poetry throughout this, and there are illustrations as well. And so it just talks about his life as a child. He had a very strict, very stern father. He had a tense relationship with his brother. He had a stepmother who was very kind and caring for him. And it was just kind of about that and about him finding his voice to speak out against the government in a time when that was a big no-no. And so it was very fun to read, very beautiful lyrical writing again. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars. Then after that, I read The Giver. This is one that I have never read before, and I really should have read this in school. It might have been assigned at one point, and I just never read it. But I somehow managed to make it this far in life without ever reading The Giver, so I decided to read it. And I did not get it at all. This was my lowest rated book that I read throughout the entire month. I love dystopian, like YA books and adult books. I love dystopian thought processes and how people create different worlds. And I understood that aspect of this book. I got the whole point of the dystopian society and those themes that were throughout this book. This book is about a little boy who lives in a dystopian society where everything is decided for you. He is getting ready to turn 12 and he's getting ready to be given his job assignment for the rest of his life, that a panel has decided what he's going to do for the rest of his life. And so it's about his job assignment and what kind of comes of that. And I was with this book and I was enjoying this book up until the last like 3 or 4 chapters, and then it totally just went for me. I did not understand it. I finished this book and literally was like, huh? I just didn't get it at all. And I don't know if it's because this is part of a quartet and maybe I need to read the rest of the quartet and that will help explain it. I don't know. But I know this is a really, really common book that is assigned reading in school. And so it's surprising to me that it would be that dependent on finishing a series if it's an assigned reading type of book. I don't know. I didn't really like it. I gave it 2 stars. We'll see if I ever decide to pick up the rest of the quartet. Who knows? After The Giver, I decided to read Rules by Cynthia Lord. This is the story of a girl whose brother is autistic. And this story is about the siblings of kids with special needs and their feelings. And you get in this book a lot of the anger and resentment that can come out through that, and the feeling of being set aside because somebody else needs something more, but also the feeling of love and loyalty to their sibling and their want to support their sibling and defend them. And so it was really good. It was a very different, I read Wonder last year or the year before, and I read Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper earlier this month, and that was another good one dealing with special needs. But this one was different because it was told from the point of view of the sibling. And I think there was something really, really special about that. And I think there's definitely a voice to be heard in regards to this book. So I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. After Rules, I read Ban This Book by Alan Gratz. I read Refugee by Alan Gratz earlier this month and was just kind of looking at his other books and saw this, and immediately the title kind of sparked my interest. And then I read the synopsis on Goodreads and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have to read that. So I read this and I flew. This was one that I did read physically and I flew through this so fast. I loved the message of this book for middle grade readers especially. This is like one of the very few books that I read this month that I recommended to my 9-year-old that she read. This is the book of a 9-year-old girl, Amy Ann, who goes to check out her favorite book from her school library, and it's not on the shelf. And she goes to talk to the librarian, and the librarian tells her that a parent has complained about the content of the book, and they decided to pull the book from the shelf, and she's not allowed to lend it out to kids anymore. And so there's a mom in the school who had put together a list of like 8 books that she did not want on the shelves, and she had a lot of pull with the school board. And so the school board just kind of said, okay, fine, we'll do this to make you happy. We'll take all the books off the shelf. And this made Amy Ann and a few of her friends really mad. So she decided to collect as many of the books that were on this list as she could and keep them in her locker and lend them out to kids in the school. And she called it the Banned Books Locker Library. Well, things come to a head, and it's kind of about why they do it and how they do it and what happens when things come to a head and how they go about reconciling it. And it was so good. The message of this book is so much on it's good to stand up for injustice and to speak your mind, but there's a way to do it, and it's important to go about the right avenues of doing things. And the one line in the end of this book that I really appreciated as a parent myself is that no one has the right to tell you what you can and can't read except your parents. And in the end of the book, her dad is like, I don't want you reading this book. And she's like, what? But we just fought to get all these books back into the library. And he's like, yeah, but didn't you say that as the parent, I can tell you that I don't want you reading that? And she's like, oh yeah, I guess, you know. And so I, as a parent, really appreciated that Alan Gratz put that in the book, that just because society says it's okay for you to read everything, your parents really get to be discretionary about what, as a child, you're reading and consuming. And so I really, really appreciated this. I love this book so much. I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely just thought this was a gem. So that was fantastic. The next book that I listened to and do not have a physical copy of is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. So this is one that was mentioned in Ban This Book as a banned book, and I'd heard a lot about this book. My kids really like the Fudge series by Judy Blume, which is the Tales of Fourth Grade Nothing and the subsequent books. So they really like those, and so at the library, they're going through Judy Blume's books, and I had heard a few things about Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, that gave me enough of a red flag to know that I don't want you guys reading this until I've read it first. And so I decided to go ahead and read it. This is a story of a little girl, well, a girl, she's 12 years old, and she's going through puberty. And it's very much about the physical changes that girls go through during puberty. And I don't know as though I would want my kids reading it yet. It may be appropriate for like the very, very high end of middle grade. But there's a lot of talk about naked bodies, and very frequently in the book, they talk about how her dad gets Playboys and what's in them, and which was probably more normalized back when the book was written than it is now. And so I'm glad that I listened to it, so now I know, and I'm not just taking somebody else's word for it. But I know now that I don't want my kids reading this until they're much older. But it was good. I gave it 3 stars. As a book in and of itself, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. It just has kind of those few topics in it that you might not want the lower end of the middle grade spectrum reading, depending on the parents. And that's just my opinion for my own children. So after Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, I picked up Rhyme Schemer by K.A. Holt. This is another book written in verse, and it's a very short, very skinny book. I read this in one night. This is the story of a boy who's in middle school, and he's not a nice kid. He is a bully. He is the youngest of 5 boys. Both of his parents are doctors, and he is just not nice. He's writing these poems, and you're seeing the thoughts that he's having about his classmates and his teachers and his siblings, and he's not kind. And then about halfway through the book, one of the kids he's been picking on finds out something about him and kind of uses it as blackmail and starts bullying him. And so you get kind of the dual perspective of the bully and then the person being bullied. But it was a really good book. It was a fast, fun read. I ended up giving this 4 stars because I thought it was enjoyable. I would recommend it. So after Rhyme Schemer, I picked up another one that I probably should have read before this point, and that is Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. I had never read this one either. And so this is the story of a girl, Winnie, who finds a stream in the woods across from her house, and she goes to get a drink from it, and a little boy in the woods says, no, don't do that. And so she gets to know this little boy's family, or I guess he's not little, he's 17. But this boy's family, and they tell her that if you drink from the stream, you will live forever and never die. And how that it's not all it's cracked up to be, and she should never ever drink from it, and she can never ever tell anybody about the stream. And so it's just kind of about them and their story, and her decision on whether or not she's going to drink from the stream or not. And I really thought this was fun. I enjoyed this. It's a very tiny little book, and it was enjoyable. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was sweet. And then the last book that I read for middle grade March was The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street by Carina Yong. This was the book that I have been reading out loud with my kids at night this month, and I was not a huge fan of this. I don't know if it's because I spread it out over such a long period of time. We would read about a chapter a night, but my kids didn't really care for it either. My kids are, the ones that were listening are 5, 7, and 9, and none of them really were captivated by this story at all. I've heard wonderful things about this, and so I had really, really high hopes, and the cover is so dang cute. But it just kind of was meh for all of us. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. I'm really hoping that the next book I decide to read out loud to them is something better, because otherwise I might lose my audience, which would break my heart, but it was good. This is the story of a set of kids, the Vanderbeekers. There's 5 kids, and at the beginning of the story, it's a couple of days before Christmas, and they find out that their landlord is not renewing their lease. They live in New York City. He's not renewing their lease, and they have until the end of the year, so just a couple of weeks, to leave their apartment. And so it's their story about trying to change his mind. And it was good, but it wasn't worth the hype, in my personal opinion. So those are all the books that I read, the remainder of the books that I read for middle grade March. Middle grade March was so much fun for me. I think for me it meant something different because I have kids that are reading some of these books. Some of the books that I read this month, actually quite a few of the books that I read this month, were books that my teachers have read in school to them, or that my kids recommended to me. And so that was a lot of fun for me. But I really, really enjoyed this readathon. I'm so glad that I took part in it. Big thank you to Krista and Katie for hosting this readathon. If you took part in middle grade March, I would love to know what some of your favorite books were that you read, and if you've read any of these books, I would love for you to tell me your thoughts about them. And until next time, see you later.